Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
All right, guys, here we go. We're going to review for chapter 15. Like always, I have your notes sheet in my hand that I went through and already got the answers for. So let's go ahead and break this thing down quickly. Vocabulary words: secede, sectionalism, antebellum, abolition, popular sovereignty, states' rights. Make sure you went in. Make sure you know those. You probably will get tested on those. What are the things that we talked about? Remember that theme? We're talking about sectionalism and the breaking apart of the United States. First thing we covered here was the Compromise of 1850. And what's the Compromise of 1850? Well, we had to figure out what we were going to do with California. California was going to come in as a state. Was it going to come in as a free state or a slave state? We didn't know. The 3630 line set up by the Missouri Compromise of 1820, remember, that split California in half. So what was it going to do? Free or slave? Or was it going to come in as half free, half slave? Right? So that was the big thing. And it was really all talking about representation in Congress. All right, because if it came in as a free state, then the imbalance would be in the North, the abolitionists, the anti-slavery states. They would have the votes to control Congress. And if it came in as a southern state, then they would have control of Congress because California was a 31st state, came in as the 16th free state. Now that made Northerners happy. Yeah, we count another free state. We now control the Senate. What did the southern state get? Remember, they needed to try to appease or try to please the southern states. So what do? They get the Fugitive Slave Act. And what does that do? That makes Northerners return their runaway slaves under the penalty of law. It allows slave owners to go up to the North and kidnap their runaway slaves, or even sometimes free African Americans in the North, bring them back down into the South and institute them back into slavery. Sometimes it would be brought in front of a justice, and even the justice was kind of crooked. Well, not the justice himself, but the idea of the justice was crooked, because in order to set a man free, as a black man free, he would only get $5, but to reinstitute him into slavery, he would get 10. So I guess just like any other person, they went for the more money, especially if it was in the South. These justices, they went for the more money in their pocket, so they made more slaves than not. Another thing that happened, the Kansas-Nebraska Act 1854, the South didn't want Nebraska to come in as a state because that would mean that it was above the 3630 line, again for the Missouri Compromise, and that meant that it would be a free state, and they didn't want to have that. Senator Stephen Douglas comes up with this grand idea of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And what is it really trying to figure out? It's, remember I said about putting a Band-Aid on slavery? This was one of those things. It keeps kind of rekindling slavery and what slavery is going to be to the country. So Stephen Douglas comes up with this great idea about what you call popular sovereignty. One of your vocab words, know it. It's going to allow these territories to vote if they want slaves or not. He kind of promises, in a way, Kansas to the southern states, like, hey, guys, you can get this state here. And it really goes against the Missouri Compromise of 1820, right? Compromise of 1820 said any state coming in above those lines could not happen. You know, they had to be free states. Well, this goes against that. And one of the main proponents against this whole thing is Abraham Lincoln. He's the guy coming from the Republican Party that really pushes this forward. What happens in Kansas at this time, what we call bleeding or bloody Kansas. The sack of Lawrence happens at the time. Lawrence was the epicenter of the anti-slavery, the abolitionist movement. Most people there wanted Kansas to come in as a free state. However, what happens, it has a pro-slavery legislature. They have these pro-slavery border ruffians, these guys who are running across the Missouri-Kansas border into Kansas, decide to stuff those ballot boxes, that popular sovereignty, right? They can vote for slaves, stuff in those ballot boxes to make Kansas a slave state. Not only that, they actually go into Lawrence, Kansas, and burn a couple of buildings like the Free State Hotel as well as others to the ground, and actually go ahead and injure and kill some anti-slavery abolitionists. The Republicans, the party of Abraham Lincoln, wants Kansas to come in as a free state. However, the Democrats and the president at the time, Franklin Pierce, wants it to come in as a slave state. So what happens after the sack of Lawrence? There's a guy out there, like I said, he's a terrorist or a martyr. His name is John Brown. He seeks revenge for the sack of Lawrence. He's a staunch abolitionist. His idea is to really give payback for the sack of Lawrence. He enters Pottawatomie Creek Massacre with a bunch of his kids. They drag 5 anti-slavery guys out of their houses in the middle of the night. And remember what I said, he hacks them down with long swords. This really leads Kansas into a civil war. John Brown also, right after this, goes to Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which is an arsenal. He storms the arsenal, tries to grab all these guns and arm the slaves for a big slave uprising. That totally fails. He's captured by future Confederate General Robert E. Lee. He's ultimately hanged. A bunch of his sons died there. So he dies either a martyr for the cause, trying to get rid of slavery, or he was a terrorist because, he struck terror in the heart of other Americans. What's another thing that we covered right here that's tearing this country apart? Dred Scott and the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave. Remember, he lived in Missouri, but then he moved to different areas like Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, which were free states. So Dred Scott, upon moving back to Missouri, he tries to sue for his freedom. He says, because I lived in those other free territories, that made me a free man, so I should be a free man, not coming back as a slave. That fails because Roger Taney, Chief Justice Roger Taney, boo, says that there are a couple of reasons why Dred Scott couldn't sue for his freedom. Slaves could not sue because they weren't citizens. They were considered property. And another thing is Congress didn't have the authority to say what was and what wasn't a slave state. They can't say who has slaves. That's dumb. So what does it do? It takes that compromise of 1820, that Missouri Compromise, and now makes it unconstitutional. Oh, Congress shouldn't be able to say who has slaves and who doesn't. Final straw of this, what's going on here, the election of 1860 of Abraham Lincoln to presidency. Remember, he wasn't on any ballots in the South. Nobody in the South liked Abraham Lincoln. He wanted to preserve the Union. That was his number one goal, preserve the Union. Second goal was not to spread slavery. However, these Southerners didn't want to hear that. Their ears were closed. They're like, if Lincoln becomes president, slavery's done. And if slavery's done, our life and our economy and our way of life is just done. It's trashed. So what does South Carolina do at the time? South Carolina, right after the election of President Abraham Lincoln, they decide to secede from the Union. They said, hey, we were a state. We volunteered to join the Union. We're volunteering ourselves right out of it. So they secede along with other states. They form the Confederate States in America. And now the issue of slavery is really starting to boil over. We're going to have a North, the Union, the United States of America, the South, the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America under President Jefferson Davis. We have this war, the Civil War. This is what it boosts right into. The last thing I wanted you to know is about Uncle Tom's Cabin. That novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe that really was kind of fuel for the gasoline, fuel for the fire of the Civil War. There's that book that showed the harsh realities of slavery. Quick review for chapter 15, but remember, it's all talking about tearing this country apart, and it's all behind, what's behind it all is slavery. Good luck on your test.